بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى صحابته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين والعاقبة للمتقين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين بك يا فتاح يا عليم. وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Identity. Really this topic is one that requires deep study. It requires the expertise of social historians, of sociologists, of anthropologists, of people who have dedicated their lives and careers to studying all of these issues at a very deep level. And what we have done today is ruminate and contemplate different perspectives on the question. And all I have to share with you is my own ruminations. And what I have to share today is just one more addition to the voices that were very profound in their articulation on this topic. And I don't trust myself to be able to give voice to my thoughts impromptu. So what I did today at IHOP at 4 o'clock in the morning when I arrived here, I sat over a cup of coffee with free refills that probably affected some of the content of what I have to share with you today. So I do ask that you have a little mercy with me today, a little compassion. This is a snapshot of where my mind is on the issue of our Muslim American identity. If you ask me next week or next year, I may have something more to say, I may have something different to say, but for what it's worth, what I have to share with you today is the result of a lack of sleep, a very long trip, and IHOP coffee that was refilled about 3 or 4 times this morning. Our American Muslim identity. Before the modern nation state, identity had more to do with the language one spoke in a given region than with anything else, which gave rise to tribes, then to peoples. The word in Arabic for region, mintaqa, has at its root nataqa, pronunciation. And Allah has said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ. That among His signs is that He has created the heavens and the earth, and the differences in your tongues and your colors. Indeed, in that are signs for those possessed of knowledge. Tribalism was the forerunner of racism. And it is interesting to note that our Prophet ﷺ appealed to the language that one spoke in order to eradicate the ignorance of tribalism at his time, when he said, ﷺ, مَنْ تَكَلَّمَ بِالْعَرَبِيَّةِ فَهُوَ عَرَبِيٌّ. Whoever speaks Arabic is an Arab. And his abiding reminder shall forever resonate that no one has superiority over anyone else except through a spiritual rank that is known only to Allah, taqwa. This teaching in the Prophet's Sermon on the Mount, if you will, echoes the verse, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into nations and tribes in order that you may come to know one another. Indeed, the most honored of you with Allah are those who are most mindful of Allah. Indeed, Allah is knowing, subtly aware of all that you do. America is a socio-political experiment in taking all these different tongues, colors, nations, and tribes and attempting to unify them all as one. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, at least on paper. And the quintessential question at the heart of this experiment is whether America is a melting pot or a salad bowl. How one conceives of identity will obviously differ depending on the answer to that question. Whether native or naturalized, religious or irreligious, young or old, our notion of identity in America depends on whether we perceive this country as a homogeneous monoculture or as a heterogeneous multicultural exchange. This rings loudest among our youth, who by this time next year will be entering college as the first generation to do so born after 9/11. Never before has the question of identity been as poignant as with the Muslim screenagers of today. How does one reconcile between a religion that submits the self to the divine and a culture that deifies self-expression without splitting one's personality? The failure to do so is what has led our young people to exit stage left. Hence, the atheist Muslim. What is more troubling than a woman who opts to remove her veil, for example, in order to better express herself, is all the praise she receives from fellow practicing Muslims for her courage. Hashtag, you do you, girl. A more egregious example is that of a Muslim who publicized his conversion to Christianity just a couple years ago, who thereupon received heartfelt congratulations from two practicing Muslims on a graduate student forum. These examples demonstrate what happens when you begin to melt in a pot. But consider people like Osama Cannon, may Allah preserve him. And we should recite the Fatiha for him. But consider people like Osama Cannon, a teacher, Rami Nashishibi, community leader, Dr. Sherman Jackson, a public intellectual, Brother Ali Newman, an artist, Dalia Mugahid, an activist, Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, athlete, Hakim Archuleta, a healer, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, a scholar, etc. And you can taste the vinegar of Islam poured out onto lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, carrots, olives, turnips, and broccoli. In the eulogy of Dr. Sherman Jackson, as he bade farewell to Muhammad Ali Hajj, he proclaimed, as a cultural icon, Ali made being Muslim cool. Ali made being a Muslim dignified. Ali made being a Muslim relevant. And all of this he did in a way that no one could challenge his belongingness to or in this country. Ali put the question of whether a person can be a Muslim and an American to rest. Indeed, he KO'd that question. With his passing, let us hope that that question will now be interred with his precious remains. But that question still looms. It brought us here tonight. It was printed on the flyer. Our American Muslim identity. These 4 words tell the whole story. They bespeak a psychology of a minority seeking to assimilate itself into a dominant culture. As I sat this morning at El-Hajj, writing this all out, a Latino man excused himself, got up from the table, and left his Asian girlfriend to shake the hands of 2 white soldiers who sat across from him. I found myself questioning my own Americanness, because that's not something I can perceive myself ever doing. But I was reminded that George Wallace once called Malcolm X a great American. And it got me thinking, is Kaepernick any less American than Hannity? And why is Hannity's patriotism unquestioned, unchallenged, while Kaepernick's patriotism is subject to debate? And it brought me back to the problem of these 4 words, our American Muslim identity. Allow me then to get behind the psychology of such a phrase as I attempt to answer the question that Muhammad Ali's legacy should have silenced. First, our. I remember growing up hearing things like, "This American guy said to me at work," which almost exclusively meant this white guy. Otherwise, he would have been described as this black guy, or this Chinese man, or this Mexican. This reveals a real dissonance in the collective consciousness of a community that is seeking acceptance, a sense of belonging, the desire to fit in. But acceptance from whom? Belonging to whom? Fitting in with whom? Think about it. Are you as comfortable in your Muslim skin shopping at a suburban mall as you are walking a few street blocks in the inner city? Where do you feel otherized? Where do you feel you don't belong? Where do you feel unwelcomed? It is arguable that the safest and most welcoming place for Muslims of all backgrounds is in the inner cities. Yet we do not usually identify with the Muslims of the inner city when we use phrases like our American Muslim identity. Meanwhile, our presence here in this country is the direct result of the struggles of black Americans in the 60s who opened the floodgates of brown immigration to this country. And if anyone has anything to teach us about identity, it is those who have to face the severe realities of racial identity in this country on a daily basis. The first jamarat of our disunity that must be stoned is the racial segregation of our mosques, the refusal to intermarry, the racial slurs that go unchallenged in polite conversation, and 2 national conventions that happen on the same date in the same city, year after year, just miles apart. In the African American experience of the American experiment lies all the resolutions to our need for acceptance, belonging, and fitting in. And they have a thing or two to say about resistance and struggle. They are unparalleled as the authors of global culture. And the Muhajirun and the Ansar have never been more need of one another than we are today. Our American Muslim identity. What is an American? It is very difficult to agree on one definition for what an American is, let alone an American Muslim. And lack of definition, in the words of Sheikh Hamza, in some sense, is the definition. The grand narrative begins where, quote, the Mayflower landed on Plymouth Rock. Malcolm X once said, "We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us." First Nations had a different name altogether for Plymouth Rock. And Thanksgiving is one of their many days of mourning, while the rest of the country celebrates. But each community unabashedly proclaims itself as American with no afterthought, and with few exceptions. In point of fact, it is so inherent to their identities that they do not feel the burden to assert it. The very phrase, American Muslim, otherizes Muslims. You've never met an American Christian, or an American Catholic, an American Jew, an American Buddhist, an American Hindu, but you've met thousands of proud and unapologetic American Muslims. The very phrase is apologetic. It is an apology that admits of itself that Muslims don't really belong here, while insisting somehow that we do, notwithstanding the presence of Islam in this country that reaches back to the first days of Christianity. When Muslims were hoarded onto ships from West Africa to build this dirt from scratch into a nation, their graves are marked by one hand on headstones with the index finger raised, testifying to the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They died for you and me to belong, and are turning in their graves that we have to convince the dominant culture through some hyphenated label that we actually belong here. This is where we live, this is where we die, this is where we are to be buried, and this is where we will be resurrected. The Prophet ﷺ has said, Al-biladu biladullah, all of the land belongs to Allah. This land is your land, this land is my land, from the California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me, and Allah made it. And he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam continued, وَالْعِبَادُ عِبَادُ اللَّهِ. All of the slaves belong to Allah. So it is high time that some of Allah's slaves stop trying to seek the acceptance of other of Allah's slaves and turn to Allah alone to seek our acceptance. Our American Muslim identity. Muslim. Perhaps the most contentious word in this phrase, our American Muslim identity, is the word Muslim. As a community, we have departed from the prophetic definition of this term. We have turned this term into an identity, and as such have ascribed ourselves to an entity, what Sheikh Hamza coined Bani Islam. We have taken a word whose first connotation described a relationship between creator and creature, and turned it into an ID card. The Shahada, which is a spiritual perceptiveness and witnessing, is plastered onto the flags of political nation states and picket signs. It is appropriated as a symbol of national identity and thereby politicized into the consciousness of the citizens of a state. From time to time, it assumes political sovereignty and unleashes untold havoc. In the words of Sheikh Abdul Hakim Winter, there is no Islam but Islam, and Muhammad is the messenger of Islam. So when Islam is a noun, it is a person, place, or thing. It's an organization, it's a convention, it's a book, it's a body of scholars, it's a mosque, it's a movement, it's a university degree, it's a legal code, it's a box you check on an application, it's a way of life. And when Islam is an adjective, it describes a noun. It's Islamic, it's cultural, it's an affiliation, it's the desire to Islamicize, it's sectarian, it's an accessory, it's posturing, it's an ideal, it's an ideology, it's an identity. Islam, however, being a verbal noun, a masdar, it is a gerund or an infinitive. It's submitting or to submit. It's an intention, it's a process, it's practice, it's tribulation, it's success and failure, it's discovery, it's endeavoring, it's serving, it's living. هُوَ الَّذِي سَمَّاكُمْ مُسْلِمِينَ. Allah says about Ibrahim alayhi salam that he is the one who named you Muslims. And Ibrahim by himself was an ummah. مَا بَالُكَ بِاثْنَيْنِ ثَالِثُهُمُ اللَّهِ. What do you think about two whose third is Allah? We are never in the minority. We are always in the majority as long as we have Allah. We are always in the majority. So enough about identity. قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين. Say, my prayer, my acts of sacrifice, my life, my death are for Allah, the Lord of all of creation. With this was I commanded, and I am the first person to submit. I am the first person to submit. Let us find our identity in that. In the words of Rami Nashashibi, Allah preserve him, Islam is not who you are, it's what you do. Islam is not who you are, it's what you do. He was with Imam Warthuddin Muhammad 3 days before his passing in a humble home scarcely big enough for a third person to have been among them. Throughout his visit, the Imam had to get up time and again to open the front door to children who came seeking sweets and desserts. And this was not Halloween. The Imam kept apologizing profusely for his interruptions. And his last visitor was a woman with whom he would normally converse. And none of these were Muslim. This was a woman with whom he would normally converse. But instead he sought her permission to entertain his guest, while motioning to her to grab a bag of groceries that he himself personally packed for her and left for her on the kitchen table. Muslim is an active participle. It's an ismu fa'il. It's what you do. It's how you live. It's how you die. Udkhulu fi silmi kaffa. Enter into submission entirely. وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. And do not die except entirely submitted. We do not play the game of identity politics. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قالوا بلى شهدنا أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. When your Lord drew forth from the children of Adam, from their loins, their descendants, and made them testify concerning themselves, am I not your Lord? They said, indeed we do testify. This, lest you should say on the day of judgment, of this we were unaware. We lay claim to our identity, ultimately, in that primordial moment wherein God assembled our souls and asked who He was and who we were. Behold, the Prophet ﷺ arises to honor the funeral procession and is questioned about the Jewish identity of the corpse, to which he responds, أَوَلَيْسَتْ نَفْسًا. Is it not a soul? We are not human beings on some spiritual journey through life. Rather, we are spiritual beings on the human leg of the journey. As one of the poets said, يَا خَادِمَ الْجِسْمِ كَمْ تَشْقَى لِخِدْمَتِهِ أَتَطْلُبُ الرِّبْحَ فِيمَا فِيهِ خُسْرَانُ أَقْبِلْ عَلَى النَّفْسِ وَاسْتَكْمِلْ فَضَائِلَهَا فَأَنْتَ بِالنَّفْسِ لَا بِالْجِسْمِ إِنسَانُ. O servant of the body, how wary you are in its service. Do you seek benefit in that which defaults to loss? Turn all your attention to the soul and perfect her virtues, for by virtue of the soul, not the body, is your humanity. In essence, you are not even the same person you were yesterday, O Muslim. You are not even the same person you were yesterday. That person and his identity are gone, for with the recreation of every moment comes the death of its past. So that sinner of the past is no more. You can't even get mad at that guy. So just seek forgiveness for him. What's left is the grace of today and the lesson learned. And you are a new person, renewed in every breath of life that is extended to you. Our American Muslim identity. Identity. As with Islam, when one settles his identity in a noun, he becomes stagnant and rigid. When one settles his identity as an adjective, one is subservient to circumstances and acculturation. But when one settles his identity in a verb, there is only God and one's own growth and progression and depth over time. Descartes, when endeavoring to know himself, concluded, I think, therefore I am. Behold, the ego in all his glory. But had he truly silenced his thoughts and allowed himself to think, he would have only concluded, I think, therefore he is. In philosophy, the essence is distinguished from the accident. What is the essence of a human being? And should we not identify with that essence as opposed to the accident? Nowadays, identity itself is in crisis. Identity is having an identity crisis. It is one of those, to quote Dr. Omar, plastic words, which bear meaning and mean nothing at the same time. One man remarked that, for example, if David Duke and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf are both racist, then rejoice, because you got rid of racism. We have got rid of racism. Racism doesn't even exist anymore because the word doesn't even have meaning. Identity is becoming one such plastic word. As I boarded the plane last night, the passenger behind me asked the flight attendant, "How are you?" And he responded, "Another day of being me, couldn't be much better than that." And I thought to myself, now here is a man who identifies as, well, himself. The autonomy of the self, to the extent that it only self-identifies. Then I thought to myself, this man simply can't think straight. I know it's late. He can't think straight. Yes, identity implies sameness or that which is identical. But when grappling with these terms in English, I oftentimes look for their equivalent in Arabic for clues as to how to frame my thinking, how to interpret the world and myself in it, how to perceive reality as it is, not as how they think it ought to be. The word for identity in Arabic is huwiyya. The he-ness of a thing. The he-ness of a thing. Or its essence. But what is fascinating is that it is also the he-ness with a capital H. The he-ness of a thing. I.e., God in that thing. Imam Ali alayhi salam once said, "Man arafa nafsahu, arafa rabbahu." Whoever knows himself knows his Lord. Whoever knows himself knows his Lord. And he also said that nothing happens before my eyes except that I see Allah before it, in it, and after it. One of the major problems today with the one-sided discourse on identity is that it is premised on feelings and desires, unmitigated by revelation. Sexual preference is an identity, I dare say an ethnicity, now backed by law. Unaware to most of us, many Muslims who are attracted to the same sex find it offensive to be labeled as LGBTQ. For that is accidental to their being in the world, not a matter of their essence. Polyandry is now an identity. In Delaware, children are now being encouraged to choose their own racial identities. Human beings are not only behaving like animals, but identifying as animals. Catwoman is not just some superhero. No, she's a cat trapped inside the body of a woman. And any critique is a remnant of a systematic institutionalization of religion and patriarchy spanning centuries, so the debate is silenced. Mental constructs constitute identities and sometimes manifest in the most heinous acts of violence. Iblis, let us not forget, was the first creature to wrongfully identify himself on an accident rather than on essence. He mistook the accident for the essence when he said to his Lord, "Ana khayrun minhu, khalaqtani min nar wa khalaqtahu min teen." I am superior to him. You created me from fire while creating him from mud and clay. The essence is that he was created by God. The accident is that God used fire. Behold, the first racist. the first of God's creatures, to put forth a philosophical proposition and argue on the basis of a conjured up mental construct. Ultimately, every ism is a prism of a mind in prison. And every identity based on an ism is temporal and will avail nothing when the angels ask, "Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who is your prophet?" All of the accidents inherent in Adam were of no value until Allah animated them with the essence. And only at that point did He command the angels, فَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. And after I fashion him, the accident, and then breathe into him of my ruh, the essence, fall prostrate before him. O family of listeners, what we do with our Islam defines who we truly are. When we occupy ourselves with the work of God in the world, out of love for Him and for what and whom He loves, and take up the burden of the prophets as our own burden, then we will find sweet love in the hearts of those for whose sake we toil and struggle. At that point, we will not be the slightest bit concerned about seeking acceptance, a sense of belonging, or the desire to fit in. We will have found a home in the hearts of those we serve, a solace in their smile, a proof with God in their prayers. In the south side of Chicago, there are African Americans who are not Muslim, who bear the name Rami. And in that is a sign for those who reflect. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والعفو منكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.